Or if you have a nasty rash, keeping you up at night. Don't worry about a thing.
Don't worry.
'Cause Atticus Health will make you feel alright.
I'm Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from unceded Kulin Nation land. Welcome back for the 50th live broadcast of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. I want to thank all listeners, guests, texters, commenters, everyone who's been engaging with the show, with our conversations, who've opened up so vulnerably, so candidly, who've joined me for hour-long conversations, and who have been with us here through this journey of more than a year now of broadcasting from the Karam swamp. So thank you so much. I can't wait for another incredible conversation tonight, another amazing guest, very serendipitous timing, a lot to celebrate. We're really excited, and we hope you'll be with us here tonight as well, and text us your questions, comments, or congratulations for Anna and Public Realm Lab to 0493 213 831. My guest tonight and conversation partner is Anna Maskiell, a registered architect and co-founder of Footscray-based architectural consultancy Public Realm Lab. She is an advocate, researcher and advisor on the ways in which the built environment can foster inclusivity, creativity and sustainability by putting human experience at the centre of strategic and design thinking. Anna has over a decade of major project experience spanning master planning, strategic facilities planning, architectural design and delivery for local councils and state government departments, not-for-profit organisations and tertiary institutions. Anna was the lead architect for Powerhouse Place, the revitalisation of the powerhouse on the Mighty Murray in Mildura, which was awarded the Victorian Architecture Medal in 2024, and just last week cleaned up 4 awards at the Victorian Chapter Australian Institute of Architects Awards, which is absolutely incredible. Anna is the recipient of the Dulux Study Tour and Martin Bequest Scholarship. Anna is also a non-executive director of Footscray Community Arts Centre, an internationally recognised organisation that advocates for all communities to be valued as makers of culture. Welcome to the program, Anna.
Thank you, and congratulations on 50 episodes, or 49. We've got to make it through the 50th, haven't we?
Yeah, we've just started, but we're live on air, so it's
we
all
can
happening.
We can do it.
Thank you so much, and a welcome back to the airwaves as well. I feel like it's perfect. You've had some radio experience before in the past. Also, so much to celebrate.
Thank you.
Does it feel real yet?
No, not at all. I'm not sure that it ever will, to be honest.
I heard murmurs across the industry that you and your team were incredibly shocked that night.
We were extremely shocked. I was very clear with the team that, being shortlisted was a phenomenal outcome, and that we should go and celebrate with our peers and all of the wonderful work that's being done across the industry. And they just kept kind of jabbing me in the ribs every time we won something. Told ya. And I was like, no.
That's amazing. And hopefully the next, you talk about it as Public Realm Lab has been in practice in pro rata practice for about 5 years. So huge congratulations, and hopefully it fuels and steams the next 5.
Yeah, hopefully. Absolutely.
Ahead. The first question I like to ask all my guests is, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
I grew up in Queensland, so we were talking before about my history on a slightly seedier radio station, 4ZZZ in Brisbane, and so my earliest memories are of the regional town I grew up in, and I guess in particular our property. So it's really memories of the river and the dams and the waterways in particular, I guess. And then if we fast forward to kind of built environment, Robin Gibson's, cultural centre, that precinct in Brisbane on the river, if you're familiar with it. So it's the Performing Arts Centre, it's Queensland Art Gallery, the State Library, which is such a physically striking and kind of quite brutalist modernist structure in many ways.
And they're all interconnected. It's an amazing development.
It is amazing. And Queensland Art Gallery in particular has these incredible, beautiful reflecting ponds with these kind of gorgeous pelican sculptures. So in terms of kind of, I guess, built environment, for me, I have some very fond, very powerful memories of visiting the museum and the gallery as a child.
How old were you when you realised that this was incredible architecture? It wasn't just a fun place to go.
I'm not sure. I mean, probably architecture really came on my radar probably only when I was about 14 or 15. So maybe around that time, I started to kind of, the cogs kind of joined, I guess, in a sense.
Super cool. I'm really interested in how your insider knowledge, in a way, of living by the river, living by water, might have helped you empathise with the community that you worked with. In Mildura, on the Powerhouse Place project.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I hadn't really thought of before in terms of my personal history. I mean, I think waterways are obviously, massively significant to human settlement and history across the world. They're extremely important to First Nations communities, and they've been extremely important, obviously, to in settler communities in Australia in terms of the passage and movement of resources.
And transport.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, rivers weave so many of those threads together for us. And I think in particular, one of the interesting things about the Powerhouse project is that we won that project in COVID, in the depths of COVID, which is when I think all communities were really re-establishing their reverence for the natural world and spaces outside.
And gathering together.
Absolutely, in the only places that you're allowed to. Which, the riverfront in Mildura has been, it's a very powerful and important place in many Mildurans' psyche, for good reason.
How did that project come about for you?
Like a lot of our work, I mean, we exist to enrich public life, so we're very clear about the work that we do, and it has to make a contribution to public life, and so typically that means that it's publicly, funded and procured work, a lot of which is delivered through tender. So we were successful in a tender for the Mildura project.
Amazing. A lot of your projects aren't so traditional, though.
No.
Public Realm Lab has a really big strategic arm, and I'll definitely want to come back to Powerhouse Place and really discuss the project later in our conversation. But I want to bring listeners into your world a little bit and understand that Public Realm Lab, you don't just do architecture, you actually do a lot of consultancy, you do a lot of strategic thinking, a lot of design thinking. Sometimes people don't quite even know what design thinking or strategic thinking is. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think at its most basic, the thing that really fascinates, Philip and I as the founders of the practice and all of our team, what makes us so passionate about architecture is the way in which it talks to who we are as people. So the way in which it acts as a kind of container for culture and for social interactions, and the extent to which it is kind of a built example of our values as a society or as a community or as an organisation. And so we talk about, strategy, culture, place. They're kind of the three things that we're really interested in. And strategy can sound really confusing, like what is this thing? But what we say to people is it's basically where you want to go. Whether it's you as a community group or you as a kind of big institution, where are you heading? That's strategy. Culture is about what you agree on, what you share. And that may be organizational culture, institutional culture, or it may be specific kind of ethnic culture. And then places where those things happen, it's where the confluence of those two things is, I guess. And it's never neutral. I think it's really easy to think that our built environment is there, but we're kind of these little autonomous humans and we kind of wander our way through it and it doesn't affect us. And I guess most architects would probably know it does affect us. And now, neuroscience and all of these other disciplines are kind of coming to the table with this incredible wealth of evidence to support what we kind of probably all intuited, which is that it absolutely affects us. It affects every single aspect of our lives. So the work that we do is really about, helping people unpick and think through the implications of strategy and culture in place. That's probably a shortish answer.
I'm really interested in how you describe culture as effectively being the middle ground.
Yeah.
And if in the ebbs and flows of time, if you look back on a civilization, it's what did they leave behind? It's actually that middle ground, that intersection of what was generally agreed on and elevated.
Yeah, and place has traces of culture, and it precludes culture. As we know, like as so much of I guess conversations with First Nations communities is about the systemic racism and barriers and challenges of a lot of the built environment. So, the physical environment is not neutral. It's not there for anyone all the time. It's very clearly based on cultural assumptions, cultural behaviours, cultural practices.
Everything's a design decision, as we keep saying in this program. Everything is a design decision.
Absolutely. And we are all cultural practitioners. Yes, we have to work with building codes and there's a lot of technical complexity, but I guess our real interest as a practice is the cultural practitioner component and the strategic component. So how do we make sure that, investment is really leveraged and that any change that we make to our cities, to our towns, to our planet ultimately is doing what the best thing that it possibly could be doing, really consciously, not just kind of accidentally.
And it's just such a no-brainer to do that thinking, to invest the time and the effort and the energy in the strategic thinking or the organisational change if required first before you build a building.
Absolutely.
Because how much more expensive is a building?
Totally. I mean, I've been thinking about it recently that, I really should check what kind of 1 square metre of a built form is and how much time of ours that would buy. Because you're absolutely right that buildings can be horrible bullies in lots of ways. They can force behaviour upon people, or they can fail to perform the way that an organisation or a group needs them to perform. They can have massive health impacts. We're talking. I'm kind of very passionate about passive house, and so there's lots of conversations about mould and condensation, and so the risks of getting it wrong are actually incredibly severe. Yeah. So another year or two, a bit more deep consultation, a bit more time to think about why are we doing this and what kind of built environment do we actually need to achieve our cultural and our strategic goals, we think is time very well spent.
Absolutely. And how often is a building procured but the organisation that's going to live in it is just not ready for that building?
Yeah, how often is a building delivered and organisations or parts of it refuse to move into it, there's so many instances. Or how often is a building, demolished or repurposed or abandoned because it can't actually be used for its intended purpose.
And it's not able to adapt to those future needs or that future purpose.
Yeah.
So that's some of the hard work you do with stakeholders and building owners. But the public might often understand this as something that evolves into placemaking. What is placemaking? Can you give us your definition?
I think if one of the things that we talk about is that because there's so much complexity in the built environment, it's really easy for the tail to kind of wag the dog, and I think, engineers, architects, everyone involved in our complex, buildings and towns and cities can easily forget that we're doing all of it for humans. We do a bit of work in the community housing sector and, the kinds of things that you sometimes hear, people are frustrated because residents are having showers and leaving the door open and it's setting off the smoke alarm. And, all these things are seen as problems because they get in the way of the building, which is kind of bossing everyone around and the systems and the services. So for us, it's really about saying who is this for? And so placemaking is about putting human experience at the centre of it. And I would say our non-human, companions. But usually we talk about the humans. That's what funders are interested in usually.
That's so true and so important and so often missed. That what is the intention at the heart of the project?
Yeah.
What is the entire purpose of it all?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, sort of philosophically and personally, I think that goes back a lot to, mindfulness and the kind of intentionality. And I think the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is the capacity to think about the paradigm within which you're operating. What are the assumptions or what are the kind of blinkers that we are, walking into this metaphorical room with? And I think, sometimes if you start with the architecture, if you're told, here's the site and here's the brief, and then there's a whole bunch of things that are outside the paddock that you're looking at, in a sense. So our deep passion is kind of, with clients and organisations who have the patience to indulge us, we keep kind of saying, well, why? And what's in the paddock outside this paddock? And, why do you think that that's important? And really zooming right out to that kind of, interplanetary view.
Amazing.
Where hopefully you can get some perspective.
That's like the power of 10, the Eames.
Yeah, exactly.
Eames zooming out.
It's so powerful, yeah.
Or telescopic perspective, as Maria Popova says.
Yeah.
Have you found you've been able to quantify that at all? Because my gut instinct, and I'm sure you knew that straight away, that's why you framed your business this way, that you're actually saving clients a lot of money. Yes, there's a year or two in escalation costs, and right now with escalation getting more expensive, sure, that costs money.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, it was 1%. It was a lot less to worry about. But you're still delivering savings by guiding them through this process. Have you been able to put any data around that, or have you been thinking about considering?
Yeah, that's a great question. It probably points to some work that I should be doing.
A research project idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the things that, we were so chuffed that the jury recognised with Mildura, for example, was how much we didn't have to build. We inherited a master plan for that project that had massive built form on the site because again, it assumed this paradigm of tourism and economic development.
Yeah.
And so the dominant method there is you kind of build something big. You build a regional gallery, or, and people can come and buy T-shirts, and people will come from Melbourne, they'll stay overnight. The economists have kind of fine-tuned that model. And, it was very hard the way it unfolded. But there was kind of a fantastic confluence of COVID. So, Melbourne had really been cut off from the regions quite substantially for quite a long period of time. Mildura's relationship to the river had really shifted during that period of time as well. And so even though this master plan had a long period of community consultation and had been endorsed, I think, less than 12 months prior to us being appointed, we had, it had lost the social license to come into being. And that was very clear. And so by actually zooming right back out and saying, okay, well, what is it that the community actually needs, and how can we deliver against these, real and serious economic objectives that are the reason that the state and federal government have invested money, but how else could you do it in a way that I guess is less about selling something, this kind of consumptive model.
Less monorail Simpsons episode.
Yeah, exactly. Fewer T-shirts. Although there are some great T-shirts that you can buy at the Powerhouse, I should say. My kids both have a couple of them.
Do they turn the building into a logo?
No. Well, I mean, one of the anchor tenant of the Powerhouse is a fantastic social enterprise who works with people living with a disability, and they sell lots of their incredible art product.
Amazing.
So beautiful paintings of local flora and fauna.
That's really, really beautiful.
But that was a complete segue. So, I mean, I think, the project was recognised for delivering a huge amount of kind of social and environmental and cultural capital with far less building, way less building than what anyone had initially anticipated.
I want to see these numbers so badly.
I'll put them in a table somewhere.
I'm sure I'm not alone in being hungry for it. And I have some of the jury citations here, actually. And it was one of the juries, there were 4 separate juries, mind you, that assessed this project. An architecture of possibility rather than prescription, which was a particularly wonderful phrase for me.
Yeah. And I think that really gets to the heart of, talking about strategy and culture in a way, because both of those things are living and dynamic. And so I guess what we talk about endlessly as a practice is that you can kind of go to strategy and understand the direction and what kinds of things that may require. And you can go to culture and you can understand what that means in terms of social behaviours and patterns of occupation and interrelationships between people. And then what you can always come back to is humans. Whilst we do, of course, have very different experiences of space, we also have pretty similar bodies in terms of our physiological requirements. And so if you kind of try to triangulate with those 3 things, you're creating kind of settings that are fertile, I guess, in a sense, for humans to do great stuff in.
Like a stage or a platform.
Yeah.
Another jury citation said, the approach is underpinned by asking the right questions of how best to reuse and where required to build new with material choices that have a positive impact on the environment by sequestering carbon, the first of its kind in Australia. I'm really interested in this consultation process and how your practice guided the clients and the stakeholder groups through that.
Yeah, I mean, we believe pretty substantially in consultation, and I guess in particular, we don't tend to talk about co-design, but we do talk about really walking together with our clients and communities. This project was supposed to unfold in a fairly conventional architectural method, and as I said, there'd been significant stakeholder consultation and community consultation done previously. So when we were appointed, the view was kind of, hit the ground running. We've got all that in the bag. And when it became very obvious that in such a short period of time, seemingly, actually community sentiment had shifted significantly, we, Mildura Council were fantastic and said, yeah, absolutely, hold everything. We need to really re-engage. And unfortunately, it was during COVID. So, I don't like doing online consultation, to be very honest. But that was the world we all had to live in. And so we did do an enormous amount of online consultation. That was workshops, focus groups. And then we also did a lot of online surveys. And then there were a few travel gaps in my memory. There were a few times where we could get up there. I remember the first time we walked the site with the traditional owners, having had 3 or 4 Zooms with them, which is just horrible.
And these are all things that Public Realm Lab, you and your team advocated for and asked for and drove. You weren't waiting for the client to dictate how this process was going to unfold.
No, and I think, Mildura were a fantastic client, Mildura Rural City Council, in the sense that they, frequently said, you're the experts. Like, what do we do? So they were brave and they were trusting, and they were, rigorous. And of course, there was good governance and scrutiny.
It's the ingredients of the best client.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. It was a pretty challenging moment when we realised that, it was a stimulus funding project. We had very specific milestones we had to hit, and that was not going to be possible because this kind of fundamental assumption that what the community wanted 12 months ago they still wanted was actually flawed.
So that those goalposts had to shift, be completely reevaluated. What's your favourite win of that project? What's a personal highlight or that? I'll let you have 3.
Well, I think they are the first public hemp masonry buildings in Australia. That's a massive win. And I'm part of a small group of people who are actively championing the mainstreaming of hemp construction and taking on the Building Codes Board, in fact. It was a really important highlight for me personally, for us as a team, but I think hopefully for the industry it's really significant because it proves that it's possible. We know that it's a precedent that has been cited now to facilitate building permits for other public buildings. So I think that's a massive win, and again, a bloody brave client who went all the way on that one. I think another one is the salvaged materials. So we kind of reinstated the ghost of a building that was previously on the site. So the powerhouse, which is the hero of the precinct, is a historic building. It's a brick building, but it's kind of, whilst it's very impressive in its scale, it's really lost the cultural legibility of the industrial complex that it was part of. It was one part of a whole precinct. And when we looked at some historical photographs and we could see the form of its companion, we kind of realised how important it was to reinstate that form to give it some legibility.
Is this the sawtooth?
Not the little sawtooth. This is the big, scaly, kind of leathery shade structure. And so it is clad, the new building, the kind of ghost that we reinstated, is clad in the rusted roof sheeting of the powerhouse. So we knew that the roof was leaking, and so the view was that it was mandatory that we put a new shiny roof on the powerhouse building, and it was about saying, okay, well, these materials are here, they are of this place, that they're no longer waterproof, they no longer function as a roof, but what else could they do? And again, I think that was pretty brave. No one, I don't think from the client point of view, really knew what that would look like.
It's just ornamental. I mean, everyone always talks about this Australian vernacular of the rusted tin and all that, and there's a mythical reinterpretation of it, but you actually did it literally.
Yeah, we did. We inspected every piece of roof sheeting as it came off and kind of said yes to this one, no to that one. And Mildura is a desert climate, and there's some phenomenal landscapes in the surrounding areas, including, red cliffs. And so I think for a lot of people, for a lot of Mildurans that I've spoken to, it kind of really makes sense visually to them. And I think it's got a great kind of story that everyone in the community can understand. It's not just kind of archy stuff. It's like, well, this stuff was here and it belongs in this place, and now it's got a new life.
Yeah, it's becoming more pluralistic in a way, more universal.
Yeah.
It's become part of where it is. I know that there's up in Arnhem Land in Northern Australia, there's communities of Indigenous artists who are only allowed to paint with materials from country. But then the collective pivoted to ruling that if you find a material on country, it's now part of country, and they're allowed to work with it. So some of this most incredible contemporary art is coming through with road signs or mining site signs being turned into art, and just hugely popular.
Yeah.
Tell me about hemp.
I could talk to you about hemp for a very long time, as many people can attest. I mean, hemp as a material is phenomenal. So it takes 100 days to grow, which is it's a pretty short time frame.
It's really fast.
It's amazing whilst it is growing. So, I'm kind of a real plant nerd on the side, and so it's nitrogen fixing. So it's great from a farmer's point of view in terms of something that they can intersperse with their other crops. It's really good for soil regeneration. So it's kind of incredible from a planetary side there as it's actually growing. You harvest hemp, and there's many products that you get from the hemp plant. So hemp fibers and hemp seed are the primary products, and hemp hurd, the bit that you can make buildings out of, if you know how, is actually a byproduct. So it's often just destroyed or burnt or used in animal bedding. So it's a complete byproduct.
Wow. So you'd never grow the hemp for a building especially?
Well, even industrial hemp farmers are really utilising the fibre and other aspects of the crop as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So then it becomes this kind of woody pulp, which you can mix with lime. And then as the lime cures, it continues to sequester carbon. And you get this fantastic building material that is super insulating, so phenomenal kind of performance in terms of keeping humans comfortable inside buildings, particularly, in Mildura's climate. It's also got great acoustic properties because it's got all these little pockets of air. It's basically mold prohibiting as well, so it's fantastic at moisture regulation because the building itself can actually breathe. So I, probably like many architects, I have had real moments of crises about what we do. I've had many moments where I wished I was a landscape architect, where our footprint would kind of be, smaller, more gentler on the planet. And so I've spent many, many, many hours, usually in the early mornings, particularly when my babies were little, kind of madly researching any method of construction that was going to be less damaging for our planet. And when I discovered hemp, I just was absolutely blown away. And so the Mildura project is probably sort of the end result of kind of 3 years of R&D in our practice, trying to understand how to work with this material, how to develop buildings that, architecture has often changed what buildings look like in response to the materials that we build with. So modernism obviously was a period of significant shift. And so we're really interested in how do we design buildings that look a particular way because they're built of hemp as well. What might that look like?
What are the main barriers to making hemp construction more popular?
Well, I'm on a task force that can tell you that. There's many. It's really interesting. It's very fascinating thinking about how you bring about systemic change. So one of the big hurdles is kind of regulatory. So, it's not a conventional building material that's well understood. So there are hurdles in terms of actually getting a building permit, although we're trying to make that smoother. Another major one is just industry knowledge and industry uptake. Sheet materials and kind of modern construction materials are really well understood. So particularly when you're working in, regional contexts or something, there's just not trades who are familiar with hemp as a material. So I think the kind of trade and the kind of supply side of it is significant. And then the next one is actually supply and demand within Australia, making sure that there are enough farmers farming hemp and producing it at the right volume to match construction demand.
Where did you source the hemp for this project?
My dream was that we were going to get a local farmer to grow it, which I just thought would have been the most fantastic success story, a plant-based building.
You said 100 days.
Within 100 kilometres of the site.
You said 100 days. That's exactly where my brain went.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we couldn't pull that off in the end. So it came from Gippsland. But still, within the state.
It's Victorian.
Yeah, exactly.
That's incredible.
Yep. So, the material itself is carbon, negative. So it's sequestered carbon before it even arrives to site. All of the waste material that we had left over from the building, which was not a lot, it just goes onto the garden as mulch. So, there's no waste.
What's the process of working with hemp for those that haven't even seen pictures of it? Can you visualize it for us a little bit?
Yeah, so the dominant method, which is what the Mildura buildings are, is in situ hemp. So it's non-load bearing in that form. So you have a timber frame typically. And we did have some steel. We're trying to endlessly weed out the steel in our buildings, but there's some steel in there as well. And then if you've ever seen rammed earth or something, it's quite a similar construction method in that you slip form the walls, and unlike rammed earth where you really have to tamp it down, you just kind of gently push the hemp into place. And then it takes about 6 weeks to cure, and then you render it.
Does it shrink?
It shrinks a little bit, not a huge amount.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And how thick do these walls get?
In Mildura, they're 300 mil in most places, and that's already giving you an incredible insulation capacity. And now on other projects, we're really interested in mainstreaming this as a construction method. So we're looking at every viable manifestation of hemp. So, there's some people trying to do SIPs, so structural insulated panels in hemp. We've got another project coming out of the ground at the moment that's using hemp blocks, so prefabricated blocks, which means that you don't have a lot of the material handling complexity and the curing time on site. I'm constantly looking at what's happening abroad, and there's some prefabricated hemp sheet coming out in a few places. So,
what about the fire requirements?
It basically doesn't burn. It's phenomenal.
That's amazing.
So, there's a lot of hurdles in terms of demonstrating the success of the product and getting, the suitable fire test certificates and so forth. But yeah, basically chars.
Do you see the technology with hemp ever evolving to the point that they can be load bearing?
Hemp itself can't be, but I guess it's about having a composite system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible stuff. We, at the start of a project, we often, a built project, we often sit down and, talk about, the direction and the aspirations for a project. And I have to say, we find it hard to not use hemp. Everything we do, it's like, well, obviously it's going to be built out of hemp.
Well, it's just that next challenge, that next interest to pursue and to keep the sustainability objectives and the holistic, really, biosphere objectives of leaving the place better than you found it.
Absolutely. And I think, we work for a lot of grassroots organisations, and so we've got one project in particular for an Aboriginal community-controlled org. And so, for them, kind of conversations around restoration of country, the economic and kind of financial opportunities for mob, to actually have traineeships as part of the project and, to actually be able to talk about local supply for materials is just phenomenal. When you think that, I was checking some stats the other day, and I think 80% of materials that go into buildings that are higher than 3 stories is fully imported in Australia. So, it just blows my mind. I guess, policy, new policies like the Future Made in Australia, these are enormous opportunities for, high-tech industries like solar, but also, I guess, some low ancient tech as well, hopefully, like hemp.
And R&D and self-sufficiency for Australia, these things are only better for our economic production and
absolutely
our economic output. It's interesting and really important to hear you say that the communities that you're engaging with, First Nations communities, are really interested in a holistic approach. It's important for them to achieve economic outcomes and community outcomes and business and education outcomes, not just having an input into the decision making in a project or
or iconography or something.
Yeah, or worse, pastiche.
Yeah. And I think, we're very lucky that we mostly work for deeply passionate, deeply committed, mostly kind of place-based entities. So certainly that's true across our First Nations communities and clients that we work with, but a lot of, other organisations who are place-based have a holistic view.
Well, that's a business decision. What do you say to listeners in our industry who may struggle to find clients like that who effectively aren't quite aligning their own values?
Yeah, I mean, it is. You're right. It's one of the things we say about strategy is that it says what you won't do as well. Like it's your direction, and it's what you will do, and it's what you won't do. And we were very clear when we established Public Realm Lab. Which, to be perfectly candid, I thought was probably going to fail. Like my rationale was, well, I've had a baby, I'm going to have another one. Let's give this a bash because we endlessly talk about, wouldn't it be incredible to practice in this way? And, probably won't work, but that's okay. And then I'll have some new skills to bring to another practice. But it has worked, not particularly easily. I mean, as you say, it's a very difficult space to work in many ways, and we're the only practice, to my knowledge, in Australia that very seriously has a kind of consulting and research and advisory stream alongside our architectural work. So it's possible.
It's certainly possible. Back to everything being a design decision. You got to also design your practice.
Yeah, you got to design your life, haven't you?
So again, congratulations on Powerhouse.
Thank you.
Amazing project. I'm sure there'll be a lot of hype, a lot more media coming out about it, a lot more conversations. Did I get the first conversation in?
No, ABC Radio, Mildura beat you to it. But
ABC Mildura.
Yeah.
Andrew
and the crew, yeah.
Next award season, but I'm sure there'll be many more conversations about that. So I want to move on and talk about Mini Madden.
Yeah.
Not a building,
not
a playground.
A playground, yeah. Well, not even a playground, really. I mean, where to start? Yeah, Mini Madden was, again, it was conceived pre-COVID, but then it really happened during COVID. And I guess in its simplest form, it was about saying, what is the least amount of built form that anyone needs? There's our office is in Footscray, our studio is in Footscray, and there's this particular square in Footscray called Madden Square, which is this precious patch of outdoor space. There's so little green space in Footscray, and there's this really precious patch that if you were in an architecture subject at university, it would look like a Barcelona kind of block or something, this kind of internalized green patch. And so it should be fantastic, and it's just a disaster, and it has been for so long. And Maribyrnong City Council, to their credit, had really tried a few things. So they'd appointed a couple of quite prominent landscape architects over the years who'd done something. They'd come in and they'd built something, and they'd put some seats and some ramps, and nothing worked. And it wasn't just kind of scary and a bit dead. Like it was pretty scary. I had lived in Footscray years earlier, and you just would never go through there.
Like it was a legitimate risk. Like when you say scary, it was actually a public risk.
Yeah. So, lots of vandalism, lots of abuse, and it was a pretty scary place. And so we kind of decided to really think holistically about this, and coming back to this view that human activity is the centre for placemaking. So we tried to say, okay, well, what is it that humans would really love to be doing in Footscray? And there's a really growing population of young families, and there's nowhere for kids to go, basically. There's a couple of major playgrounds, and you've got to cross freeways to get to them. I had been lucky enough to be in America the previous year on the Martin Bequest research, and had learnt about a whole bunch of kind of place-based initiatives, so play on the way, and this idea of using public space and really enriching it for children. And I had 2 little kids at the time as well, so I guess it was all, kind of perfectly aligning for me. So we kind of pitched this idea about using humans, and in particular using small humans, both for their kind of fantastic open-mindedness, but also for the impact they have on other people around us. And so it was about it was a bit of a social project, I guess, how to really tip the balance of behavior. Like, how much do you need to do to change what people think is acceptable? So if you add a child to a space, will people still shoot up in front of that child? Yes, they probably will. If you add 4 children and a sandpit, will people still behave in that way? So it was really this social experiment about how little can we build, but how much could we change people's perception of this space through our minor interventions, that it actually, we can really curate the human activity in the space.
Feels like a prototype for Powerhouse Place in a way.
Well, it kind of was in a way. And, interestingly, whether we win or lose a project or a tender, we always ask to have a debrief and understand what where we went well and where we didn't. And when we were appointed to Powerhouse Place, council did say, we wanted a vibrant riverfront. And you guys got that. Like, you showed us how with $25,000, like with no money, you created this vibrant public space. And we did actually have a research partner ultimately on that project. And the feedback from the community was phenomenal, just kind of this incredible connection. And families would come to Mini Madden and spend the whole weekend there. There was from a kind of well-being and a connectivity and a resilience and a community point of view, it was this enormous success for, basically no investment.
Did you think it was a spatial outcome or something you built that made it so incredible, or was it the human energy and passion and activation that went into it?
I think it was, you won't be surprised to hear me say, it was strategy, culture and place. So, we were very clear about the strategic aspirations here. And so we spent 2 years, I think, developing the partnerships. So we were working with Victoria University, who's a university based in Footscray, that is a fantastic organisation that's really focused on quite vocational training. So they were training many early years educators, and because it was COVID, none of them could graduate because they couldn't get their practical hours in a childcare centre. So, we had these partners. They had some incredible leaders who were really interested in loose parts play and really non-prescriptive play, which really resonated with me as a mother. I've got 2 wild children. And, playgrounds are just so restrictive and prescriptive in so many ways, many playgrounds. So there was kind of this radical theory about children and creativity that was coming from these fantastic early years educators. We, I guess, had a very strong philosophical view about the children's right to the city, and about, teaching young people that the city is their habitat and that it's something they can engage with and play with and belong to. So we had, I think it was 400 early years students who had to each do, 30 hours or something. So we had this kind of free voluntary workforce. We had this incredible strong philosophical kind of alignment. We partnered with some graphic design mates of ours who are phenomenal, and they did a really cheap campaign, but a really strong branding campaign, so that I think to the community it really looked real and polished and exciting, which I think is really important. Absolutely. And then we spent a little bit of money on a few spatial interventions that in themselves were not particularly significant, but we spent hours in that square. It's 5 minutes from our studio. So we were able to really interrogating, going back to my comment before about the human body and interrogating the human body in each of those spaces. So it was really about understanding where the wind, whipped you and made it so cold and blocking that wind, and where there were already depressions in the site that we could fill with sand to create sand pits for kids with lids, because there was still a lot of injecting going on. So I think, it really was strategy, culture and place. We had early years educators who reflected the very diverse demographics of Maribyrnong. So families were able to come and have their children play with someone in a bilingual or a trilingual setting.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was really exciting.
Tell me about the outfits.
Well, as I said, there was almost no money, so everything was done on donations. And one of our team, I think, had lived with one of the founders of Souk, so she donated all of those fantastic orange pants. And then Susu, our mates, had some shirts designed for us, so hence the matching outfits.
Melbourne through and through.
Yeah.
Your work in this space of I don't want to say public good, because architecture is both a service and a public good, but sometimes there's projects that come up that are very much for helping people and providing a lot of positive benefit to that individual, more so than just the community. And so you have some women's housing projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really interesting ones that we've been working on now for a couple of years was for an organisation who came to us and said, we are a feminist organisation, so, you know, we explicitly exist to champion gender equity. And one of the key ways that we do that is through housing. So our view as an organisation is that if we give women stable housing, that will help address the disadvantage that women disproportionately experience. And they came to us and they said, but we've kind of realised that we have all these rules in place as a feminist organisation. So we have designated roles that must be held by women, but we actually don't have any rules about our housing. So we don't know if we have feminist housing or not. Can you help us figure that out? Which is like, that's my favourite question. You know, when clients call me and say something like that, I'm like, can we ever? And so, you know, that's really fascinating because it goes back to this idea of zooming right out. So, you know, there's been quite a bit of work, lots of it really fantastic, looking at women's housing, but down at the kind of architecture setting, I guess. So talking about how to design better bedrooms or better kitchens. And so this invitation by this fantastic client to really zoom right out and consider housing and its role within society and transport and economic opportunity and energy poverty and all of these much bigger kind of policy implications was really exciting. And so that's what we do in our strategic work, is that we take these kind of quite nebulous, weird ideas and we slowly and rigorously drill down with them or through them to be clear about the strategy, the culture, and then the place outcomes, which we think is really powerful because then you can connect little sentences like, you know, create space for women to have an opportunity to earn an income within their home, back to big strategic and policy, you know, shifts. So yeah, that's kind of work that we love doing because ultimately that work now has been funded. Don't know if I can say who, but anyway, it's been picked up by a state government agency to make that tool that we've designed available to the whole sector. So, you know, that will be able to influence every community housing provider.
And this, in the timeline in my mind, this has come after the design guide for older women's housing.
I think, yes. Yeah, so certainly we were aware of their work before we had finished our work. So they must have started, sometime before us.
Okay, so there's also an element of parallel. I'm just wondering whether the design guide informed some of your work or...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our consulting process typically involves, you know, a literature review. So regardless of the specific project, we're often, you know, going broad in terms of literature. You know, there's not a lot, like there's not a huge amount of literature around spatial feminism, to be honest. So we looked at everything we could there. Certainly, as soon as that was published, I was at the launch for that. So we were definitely considering that, as well as lots of work that XLab has done.
Yeah. Out of Monash University.
Yeah, and then, you know, but a major stream of everything we do is lived experience consultation. So, which I know Sam and the team on the Older Women's Guide had done as well. So we did, you know, many, many, many hours of talking to women who had experienced homelessness, crisis accommodation, you know, various forms of affordable and community housing, as well as the workers. You know, that I guess is at its root, feminism really talks, well, depending on which wave you want to talk about, but understanding, you know, labour and the role of workers within a system is really important too.
Yeah, that holistic approach.
Yeah.
Well, I'm mindful of the time. I'll ask my penultimate question. What's next? What's next for you after you recover from the shock of this all?
Yeah, after I can string a sentence together again. Well, more of the same, really. I mean, it's kind of lovely to have been recognised by our peers. It was completely unanticipated. But, you know, I'm a terrible introvert, and so we've kind of been hiding away in Footscray, which is like not a design capital, unlike Fitzroy, or, you know, we've been kind of hiding away, doing our thing because we're just super nerdy. Like, we're just incredibly passionate about it, and so it was kind of nice to, you know, step into the limelight for a moment and, you know, hear people say nice things about our work, which is really encouraging. But on Monday morning after the awards, we were kind of all back at our desks going, okay, you know, let's keep doing what we're doing because we think it's important and we love doing it. So
Yeah.
more of the same, really.
Well, I hope our colleagues in the industry who are listening, who are nervous about spending more time on consultation and more time and engagement, consider that this is actually the meat and the juice in the sandwich and the real opportunity. And it delivers incredible results and delivers awards, and
Guaranteed awards.
we certainly don't do it. We don't do architecture for awards, but that is a metric, that moment of being recognised by the profession.
Yeah.
So what gives you hope?
Oh my gosh. Hemp. Hemp. Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that give me hope. I guess from a planetary perspective, I think hemp, passive house, I think we actually, it can seem so dire and so dark. And then when you realize that actually we have a lot of the tools that we need to make massive change, that gives me enormous hope. And then I think the other one really is that I have an enormous optimism and hope that as Australians, or particularly, I guess, newer Australians, that as we start to realise that the built environment is critically important to who we are and how we can be together, that we will invest more heavily in it. I was reading the other day that we're phenomenally wealthy as a country, but I think in lots of places our built environment still feels a bit cheap and a bit nasty and a bit like we're not really sure if we're staying, like we don't really...
Not committing to it with our hearts.
Yeah, and I think, I just think there's so much potential for a real built environment that belongs to this ancient continent and that brings us together. So I'm endlessly hopeful about the capacity to be part of that.
Here. A wonderful note to leave on. Thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of radio architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hi, my name's Paul Kennedy and I'm a sport reporter for the ABC, and when I'm not listening to the ABC, I listen to Radio Karim. Tune in and enjoy.